to earn medical expenses for my 6-year-old autistic son. My wife Anna took on the high-risk job of river dredging through my brother Brandon's introduction. During a flood season, she and my brother accidentally fell into the water and drowned. 3 months after they left, my son also died from prolonged refusal to eat and stress-induced exhaustion. To prevent others from repeating my son's tragedy, I took care of my wife's parents while burying myself in study. I developed a specialized treatment plan for severe autism, and later opened a charity clinic to help autistic children free of charge. Until that day when I suddenly received a call for help. "Is this Dr. Smith speaking? My daughter also has severe autism. Can you save her?" I froze, because on the other end of the line was the voice of my wife who had been dead for 10 years. On the phone, the woman pleaded almost humbly, "Dr. Smith, please, you're our last hope." A man's voice came from beside her, tearful. "Dr. Smith, my daughter's name is Lucy. She's 4 years old with severe autism, and she's contracted uremia. She refuses medical treatment. She's terrified of doctors. Now she has multiple organ failure, and the hospital has issued a critical condition notice. We've asked everywhere. In the whole country, only you can save her." I'd received no less than 100 such calls in 10 years. My charity clinic was the last lifeline for countless families with autistic children. Every time, my answer had been yes, and I never charged a penny. But this time, suppressing the chill rising from my very bones, I interrupted her directly. The child's name, age, and parents' names. The phone went quiet for a moment before the woman spoke. "The child's name is Lucy. She's 4 years old. My name is Anna, and her father's name is Brandon." I finished for her. The line went dead silent, as if surprised I would know. Anna, Brandon. These two names, after 10 years, stabbed viciously into my heart once again. I felt instantly transported back to that funeral 10 years ago. The venue was packed with people. The coffin sat beside an open grave as people stood in silence, holding black umbrellas. Anna's mother collapsed on the coffin, crying until she could barely breathe. "Anna, my daughter, how could you die?" Anna's father stood beside her, eyes red, supporting her, his voice trembling. Don't cry, don't cry. Let Anna leave this world in peace." Several relatives reached out to pull Anna's mother back, some offering tissues, some patting her back, murmuring, "I'm so sorry for your loss." I stood to the side holding 3-year-old Lorne, feeling completely hollowed out. Lorne, uncomfortable from my tight grip, patted my face with his small hand. "Daddy hurts." Anna's voice took on a tentative tone. "Dr. Smith, you know us?" I didn't answer, only heard Anna urgently whispering to Brandon on the other end, then promising me again. "Dr. Smith, money is no object. We'll give you whatever we have. As long as you're willing to help, we're willing to donate. No, to pay you 1 million. Please. 1 million. Back then, when Anna abandoned our son who also had autism, she took the $200,000 in death benefits, my son's lifeline, and faked her death to escape. How resolute she had been then. Now, to save her daughter with Brandon, Anna was truly generous. My fingers gripping the pen turned white from the pressure as I spoke, word by word. "I'm sorry, this child, I won't save her." "Why?" Anna's voice suddenly shot up, full of disbelief. "We can pay more. 2 million. Dr. Smith, you've always been." Anna couldn't finish her sentence. I hung up directly. The phone slipped from my trembling palm and hit the desk with a dull thud. Finally, the whole world was quiet. When I pushed open the front door, the aroma of food hit me, but my stomach only churned. In the dining room, Anna's parents were already seated at the long table. Across from them, as always, was an empty seat with a clean place setting. Anna's mother carried a casserole, carefully spooning creamy mashed potatoes onto the plate in front of that empty seat. She cut up a piece of gravy-covered steak and placed it there, murmuring, "Anna, time to eat. I made your favorite roast beef today." 10 years, rain or shine. They believed Anna had died heroically in flood relief efforts 10 years ago. Her body never recovered. A hero. So for these 10 years, at every meal, they left a place for Anna, with food set out. As if she were still alive, just away on a trip. I stared at that plate of steaming food, hatred churning inside me. The daughter they worshipped day and night was actually living well in another city at this very moment. And Anna and Brandon were humbly begging me to save their daughter. I changed my shoes and walked over step by step. "Smith, you're home? Hurry and wash your hands for dinner today." Anna's mother looked up at me with a kind smile, but her words cut off abruptly. Because I walked straight to that empty seat, and under their shocked gazes, I picked up the food left for Anna, turned around and threw it, plate and all, into the kitchen trash. The crash of breaking dishes exploded in the silent air. "Smith, have you lost your mind?" Anna's father shot to his feet, trembling with rage. Tears instantly streamed down Anna's mother's face as she looked at me in disbelief. "Smith, what are you doing? That's food left for Anna." I turned around and looked coldly at them, at these pitiful old people who'd been kept in the dark for 10 years. I couldn't tell them that their proud daughter wasn't dead at all. Anna just found my autistic son and me to be burdens, so she and my best friend planned a fake death and ran away together. I couldn't say a single word of it. I could only vent my 10 years of accumulated resentment in the cruelest way. Dead people don't deserve to eat. That night, I didn't return to my room. I sat in my son's room. Everything in the room remained exactly as it was when he left. His crooked drawing of our family still sat on the desk. I picked up the worn, matted stuffed toy from the bedside. This was a birthday gift Brandon had given my son. My son loved it. In his final moments, he clutched it tightly in his arms, calling over and over, "Mommy, Mommy." I held that toy and sat there all night, until dawn squeezed through the curtain cracks and shone coldly on my face. The next day at the clinic, Eve made me a cup of hot tea. As she handed it over, her slender fingers paused on the white ceramic cup. Her expression was gentle as always, but her tone carried a trace of concern. "Dr. Smith, yesterday's call. You really refused? I've never seen you like this." Eve was my deputy and my most capable partner. She knew how much I'd sacrifice for this charity clinic, and she knew I treated every patient like my own child, never giving up before. I picked up the teacup without answering. The warm liquid slid down my throat, but couldn't warm that frozen heart. "Take it slow. There's always hope." Seeing my pale face, Eve habitually tried to comfort me. I forced a slight smile in response. Hope. My hope died 10 years ago. Before I could speak, the office door burst open. A young rehabilitation therapist rushed in frantically. "Dr. Smith, Miss Eve, something's wrong. Someone's kneeling outside." Eve and I exchanged glances and immediately headed out. The afternoon sun was vicious as fire, baking the ground until white heat rose from it. Outside the clinic entrance, a large crowd had gathered, mostly parents picking up their children. In the center of the crowd, a woman knelt upright on the scorching cement. Behind her stood a man, helplessly holding a child, his face full of anxiety. It was them, Anna and Brandon. I put on a mask and slowly walked through the crowd to stand before them. "Dr. Smith, you're finally willing to see us." The moment Anna saw me, she crawled forward on her knees 2 steps, crying, her voice pitiful. "Please save my daughter. As long as you're willing to help, we'll give you any amount of money." Brandon also chimed in with red-rimmed eyes and a hoarse voice. "Dr. Smith, we've asked around. Only you can save her. Please have mercy." My gaze fell on the child in their arms. Lucy. She wore soft, comfortable cotton clothes. Her face was pale, but she still showed signs of careful nurturing. Her features resembled Anna's. But my son Lorne, when he died, he wore faded old clothes, washed until they were white. He was so thin he was just bones. His tiny body curled in my arms, his last weak breath still stubbornly calling for the woman who'd abandoned him. "Mommy." My heart felt like someone had torn it open with a dull blade, blood pouring out, the pain almost making me unable to stand. The surrounding parents began whispering. "Dr. Smith has always been so soft-hearted, why this time?" "Right, what a pitiful child. They've been kneeling here so long." I took a deep breath, suppressing the metallic taste rising in my throat. Under everyone's puzzled gazes, I looked down at Anna kneeling on the ground and said coldly, "Stop dreaming. I'll save anyone else, but not this child." The moment those words fell, the entire scene went dead silent. Anna, kneeling on the ground, jerked her head up, her eyes full of disbelief. Brandon behind her also froze, his lips trembling, unable to speak. "Why?" Anna's voice shook. "Dr. Smith, how have we offended you? As long as you save the child, money is no problem. 1 million. No, 5 million. We'll transfer it to you right now." She thought I was demanding a higher treatment fee. The surrounding parents exploded in discussion, voices surging like a tide. 5 million. Why won't Dr. Smith agree? Exactly. Dr. Smith never charges us anything to treat our children. What's wrong today? Still, you can't gamble with a child's life. These people who had once received my kindness now looked at me with reproach. I ignored them, my gaze still coldly fixed on Anna's face. Seeing me unmoved, Anna seemed to have all her strength drained. She collapsed to the ground crying, her voice shrill. "You have no heart. How can you be so cruel? She's just a child. You're refusing to save her. This is murder." Brandon also stepped forward with red eyes, pointing at my nose and roaring. "Do you have any medical ethics at all? We came seeking medical help, not charity. If you won't save her, we'll call the police." He actually pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. Soon, a police car came roaring up. 2 officers listened to Brandon's embellished accusations, looked at Anna crying her heart out on the ground, and finally approached me with difficulty. "Dr. Smith, is it?" Given this situation, Eve immediately stepped forward, blocking me, calmly presenting the clinic's charity certification documents. "Officers, we're a charity organization. All assistance is voluntary and doesn't fall under medical dispute jurisdiction." The police looked at the documents and immediately understood. They sighed and shrugged at Anna and Brandon. "We can't get involved in this. Providing help is a favor, not an obligation. We can't force it. With their last hope shattered, Anna's face instantly turned deathly pale. In the deathly silence, I suddenly let out a low laugh. I walked back in front of Anna and looked at that face, both familiar and strange, asking word by word, "Anna, do you really not know why I won't save your daughter?" Under her incredulous gaze, I slowly pulled down my mask. The thin blue fabric of the surgical mask slipped down my chin, pooling around my collar. For 10 years, this face had been hidden behind sterile masks, buried in medical textbooks, and obscured by the shadow of a quiet, unyielding grief. It was a face carved hollow by the winter of my son's death, hardened by a decade of silence. When the mask dropped, the humid afternoon air hit my skin, carrying the faint, dusty scent of the dry asphalt. Anna's breathing stopped. The tears that had been streaming down her face, leaving dark, muddy tracks on her cheeks, froze instantly. Her mouth remained parted in a half-formed plea, but her throat could only produce a dry, clicking rattle. She stared at me, her eyes widening until the whites showed all around her pupils, as if she were looking at a corpse that had crawled out of a deep, watery grave. Behind her, Brandon's grip on the little girl, Lucy, loosened. The child whimpered, her small body trembling under the harsh sunlight, but Brandon couldn't hear her. He took a stumbling, clumsy step backward, his face draining of what little color it had left until he looked as gray as the concrete beneath his boots. Andrew. Anna's voice was a fragile, barely audible whisper. Andrew. Brandon's lips moved, but the name came out as a breathless gasp. Looked at my clothes, at the doctor's coat I wore, at the clean white clinic behind me, and then back to my eyes. How are you? How am I the owner of this clinic? I asked, my voice flat, level, and entirely devoid of the warmth I usually reserved for the parents who came here. Or perhaps you're wondering why the useless, broken husband you left behind 10 years ago is the only man in this country who can save your daughter. The crowd of surrounding parents, who had been whispering in disapproval of my cruelty, fell into a sudden suffocating silence. They looked from me, their beloved Dr. Smith, whom they had only ever known by his surname, to the kneeling, terrified couple, Dr. Smith. Mrs. Zhao, whose son had been in our rehabilitation program for 2 years, stepped forward hesitantly. Do you know these people? I do, I said, my gaze locked onto Anna's trembling shoulders. Though for 10 years, I believed they were at the bottom of the regional river, drowned while trying to earn money for my late son's medical treatment. I even stood by an empty grave, holding my 3-year-old son, and watched their family weep for them. One. Andrew, please. Anna's knees scraped against the hot pavement as she tried to crawl forward, her hands reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers. We had no choice. You don't understand. I don't understand? I laughed. It was a low, dry sound that had no joy in it, only the rattle of old bones. 10 years ago, my son Lorne was 3 years old, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet courtyard. He had severe nonverbal autism. He was terrified of the dark, terrified of loud noises, and could only eat food that had been prepared in a very specific way. He needed therapy that cost thousands of dollars, money we didn't have. I looked at Brandon, who was now sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the street as if looking for an escape route. My brother Brandon came to us. I continued, each word falling like a heavy stone. He said he had a high-paying, high-risk job dredging the local river. During the flood season, he offered to get Anna a position. I begged her not to go. I told her we would find another way, but she insisted. She said she was doing it for our son. A soft sob escaped Anna's throat, her forehead pressing against the dusty concrete. A week later, the call came. The river had surged. The boat had overturned. My wife and my brother were swept away by the current. Their bodies were never found. I leaned down slightly, my eyes boring into hers. The state declared, "You dead." The insurance company paid out a double accidental death benefit of $200,000 won. But when I went to the bank to retrieve it to pay for Lorne's emergency therapy, the account had been cleared out. Every single penny was gone. One. The crowd of parents gasped. Several of them turned their gazes onto Anna and Brandon, their pity instantly turning into sharp, biting disgust. Lorne didn't understand why his mother was gone, I said, my voice cracking slightly, though my eyes remained dry. For 3 months he sat by the front door. He refused to eat. He wouldn't drink. Every time I tried to hold him, he would scream, clutching the stuffed toy Brandon had given him, crying for Mommy. One. He withered away until he was nothing but skin and bones. He died in my arms, his last breath spent calling for the woman who had abandoned him. 1. I straightened up, looking down at them as they cowered on the asphalt. And all the while, you two were living in another province, using my son's life-saving insurance money to build a new life together. Andrew, please. Anna cried, her hands flying to her face as she sobbed hysterically. I was young. I was terrified. Lorne's condition was driving me crazy. I couldn't handle the screaming, the constant care, the feeling that my life was over. Brandon was the only one who understood me. Offered me a way out. A way out. I asked quietly. So you took my son's life as the price for your freedom? We didn't think he would die, Brandon yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and defensive rage. We thought you'd take care of him. You were always the patient one, Andrew. You were the one who loved him. We just wanted to be together. Is it a crime to want to be happy? Yes, Brandon, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. When you steal a dying child's medical fund to buy your happiness, it is indeed a crime. The crowd of parents, once sympathetic to the kneeling couple, now began to murmur with a dark, furious energy. They stole their own son's life-saving money? What kind of mother does that? She let her own child starve to death. And they faked their deaths? They let their parents mourn them for 10 years. Before Brandon could reply, the sound of a vehicle door slamming echoed from the street. A taxi had pulled up to the curb. From the back seat, an elderly man and woman stepped out, supported by walking sticks. It was Anna's parents. In my previous life and for the past 10 years of this one, I had taken care of them. They were frail, suffering from chronic illnesses, and entirely broken by the death of their only daughter. I had bought their groceries, paid for their medications, and spent every major holiday sitting at their table, watching them set an empty plate for the daughter they believed was a hero. I had called them 20 minutes ago, before stepping out of the clinic. I had told them only one thing. Come to the clinic. I have found something of Anna's. They had come, expecting a relic, a diary, or perhaps some old photos. Instead, as they pushed through the crowd, their eyes fell on the woman kneeling on the ground. Anna. The walking stick slipped from Anna's mother's hand, clattering against the concrete. She stumbled forward, her wrinkled face contorted in a mixture of confusion and sheer, unbelieving shock. Smith, what is this? Who is that woman? Anna froze. She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting her mother's. Mom. She whispered. The elderly woman stopped. She stared at the face of the daughter she had mourned for 10 years, the daughter whose favorite roast beef she had prepared every single night, leaving a cold plate on an empty table. She looked at Brandon, whom she had also mourned as a nephew and a son-in-law of sorts. And then, she saw the 4-year-old child in Brandon's arms. You're alive? Anna's mother's voice was barely a squeak. She turned to me, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with a horrific, dawning realization. Smith, she's alive? She didn't drown. She didn't drown, Mom, I said softly, using the term of endearment I had used. For 10 years. She ran away with Brandon. They took Lorne's medical money, faked their deaths, and had another daughter together. Anna's mother stared at her daughter. For 10 years, her grief had been her entire existence. She had destroyed her own health, crying for a ghost. With a sudden explosive burst of strength that defied her age, the old woman rushed forward. Smack. The sound of the slap echoed through the courtyard. Anna's head snapped to the side, her cheek instantly turning a bright, angry red. You monster! Her mother screamed, her voice cracking with a pain so deep it sounded inhuman. We cried for you. We starved for you. Smith spent 10 years of his life buying our medicine, fixing our roof, and keeping us alive while you were out having another family. You let Lorne die. My grandson. You killed him. Mom, please. Anna screamed, clutching her mother's skirt. Lucy is sick. Has uremia. She's going to die. Andrew is the only doctor who can perform the sensory soothing therapy she needs to survive the transplant. Please tell him to save her. Anna's father stood behind them, his face pale, his chest heaving. He didn't slap her. He didn't scream. He simply walked over to his wife, pulled her back away from Anna's grasp, and looked at his daughter with a cold, absolute disgust. That was far more devastating than any blow. We have no daughter, the old man said, his voice trembling but clear. Our daughter died in the river 10 years ago. This woman is a stranger. With that, he turned his back on her, supporting his weeping, broken wife as they walked slowly out of the courtyard, never looking back. The next 48 hours were a chaotic, desperate scramble for Anna and Brandon. They tried to take Lucy to other hospitals in the province, but the situation was dire. Lucy's uremia was advanced, and her kidneys were failing rapidly. She needed a transplant immediately, and Brandon was a perfect match to donate. But there was a fatal complication. Lucy's severe, nonverbal autism made her highly sensitive to sensory input. The sterile smell of the hospital, the bright fluorescent lights, the cold touch of the stethoscopes, and the restriction of the medical machines threw her into violent, self-harming panic attacks. Whenever the nurses tried to insert in for or prep her for dialysis, she would scream, tear at her own skin and beat her head against the metal bed rails until her blood pressure spiked to dangerous, life-threatening levels. In her state of extreme, stress-induced exhaustion, her heart could not handle the anesthesia required for the surgery. The pediatric specialists were helpless. Without intensive sensory desensitization therapy to calm her nervous system and allow her to tolerate the medical procedures, we cannot operate, the head of the city hospital told them. And in this country, there is only one specialist who has successfully developed a protocol for this level of severe sensory dysfunction. Dr. Andrew Smith. Desperate, Brandon tried to use the only weapon he had left: moral kidnapping. On Monday morning, a local, sensationalist online news outlet published an article with a glaring headline: Famous charity doctor refuses to save 4-year-old autistic girl over personal grudge. The article, clearly written with information supplied by Brandon, painted me as a cold-hearted, vengeful monster who was letting an innocent child die to punish her parents for a decade-old family dispute. It included photos of Lucy lying in her hospital bed, pale and hooked up to a monitor, looking incredibly fragile. The internet, as always, reacted with immediate, unthinking fury. How can he call himself a charity doctor if he lets a child die? Professional ethics should come before personal feelings. Strip him of his license. I used to support this clinic, but this is disgusting. Save the little girl. By Monday afternoon, a small group of angry protesters and reporters had gathered outside the clinic gates, holding signs and demanding an explanation. Eve, my deputy, stood by the window of my office, watching the crowd. Her expression was deeply worried. Dr. Smith, the board of the charity foundation just called, she said, her voice tight. They're panicking. They're threatening to pull our funding if we don't resolve this. The public pressure is building. I sat at my desk, quietly sipping my tea. Let them talk, Eve. But the child. Eve hesitated, her gentle nature struggling with the situation. Lucy is innocent, Andrew. She didn't choose her parents. I put down my teacup. I know she's innocent, Eve. And I am a doctor. I have never let a child die when I had the power to save them. But I will not let those two monsters use their daughter's illness to escape the justice they owe my son. I stood up and pulled a folder from my cabinet. Inside were the original bank statements from 10 years ago, the police reports of the drownings, the life insurance payout receipts, and the medical records of Lauren's final days. Call a press conference, I said. For tomorrow morning. Right here in the courtyard. The Tuesday morning press conference was packed. Dozens of camera crews, journalists, and local citizens crowded into the clinic's courtyard. Brandon and Anna were there too, standing near the front of the crowd, holding a weeping, frail Lucy in their arms. They looked triumphant, believing that the public pressure had finally forced me to bend. Dr. Smith, a reporter from the local television station shouted, thrusting a microphone toward the podium. Is it true that you are refusing to treat Lucy because of a personal conflict with her parents? How do you reconcile this with your medical oath? I stood behind the podium, wearing my white doctor's coat. I looked calm, serene, and entirely untroubled by the hostile energy in the room. I have called this press conference to address those very questions, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the speaker system. First, let us look at the personal conflict the parents have referred to. I tapped the remote control in my hand. The large projection screen behind me flickered to life. Instead of medical slides, it showed a series of old official documents. 10 years ago, the woman standing before you, Anna, and the man beside her, Brandon, were declared dead by the state after a tragic river accident. I explained, my voice steady and cold. Here is the official death certificate. And here is the insurance payout receipt for $200,000, issued to me as the surviving spouse to pay for our autistic son's medical treatment. I tapped the remote again. The screen showed a bank ledger, highlighting a massive, single withdrawal of $200,000, dated just 24 hours after the insurance payout was deposited. The account was cleared out via a forged signature, I said. And here is the travel and residency registry from the neighboring province, showing that dead Anna and dead Brandon registered a new joint lease under false names just 3 days later. The journalists began typing frantically. The cameras zoomed in on the bank documents. While they were living in a luxury apartment in the capital, using the stolen money, my 3-year-old son, Lauren, was left with nothing. I said. I tapped the remote one last time. The screen showed a photo of Lauren. He was a beautiful boy, but the second photo, showed him in his hospital bed, his ribcage protruding, his eyes hollow and dark. This was my son, Lorne, 3 days before he died of stress-induced cardiac arrest and starvation because he couldn't cope with the sudden violent disappearance of the mother who had abandoned him for money. 1. The courtyard went dead silent. The reporters stared at the screen, then turned their gazes slowly toward Anna and Brandon. The hostile, judgmental glares that had been directed at me were now directed at them with 1,000-fold intensity. My brother Brandon and my ex-wife Anna committed insurance fraud, identity theft, and child abandonment resulting in death, I said, my voice echoing in the silence. The statute of limitations for insurance fraud of this magnitude, when involving fake deaths and interstate flight, does not expire. I have already submitted this file to the state prosecutor's office. As if on cue, the clinic gates swung open. 4 police cruisers pulled into the driveway, their blue and red lights flashing against the white walls of the clinic. 6 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives stepped out, walking directly through the crowd toward Anna and Brandon. Anna Smith, Brandon Smith, the lead detective said, pulling out a warrant. You are under arrest for grand larceny, insurance fraud, identity theft, and criminal neglect resulting in the death of a minor. No, no, Anna screamed, trying to pull away as an officer grabbed her arm. Andrew, you can't do this. What about Lucy? Who is going to save Lucy? Brandon was slammed against the hood of a police cruiser, the handcuffs clicking sharply around his wrists. Andrew, she's your niece. She has your blood. You're a monster if you let her die. The crowd watched in silence, no one stepping forward to help them. The reporters' cameras flashed continuously, capturing every second of their humiliating arrest. As they were being led toward the cars, I stepped down from the podium and walked over to the detective. Detective, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to the ears of the weeping Anna. The child, Lucy, is a minor in critical condition. Under the state's emergency guardianship laws, since both her legal guardians are now under arrest for felony offenses, she will be placed in the custody of the state's child welfare services. That is correct, Dr. Smith, the detective nodded. An emergency social worker is already on her way to take custody of the child. I turned my head, looking at the pale, shivering Lucy who was now being held gently by a female officer. And as the director of the state-licensed charity clinic, I continued looking directly into Anna's tear-filled eyes. I am formally petitioning for temporary medical custody of Lucy to perform the emergency sensory soothing therapy and oversee her kidney transplant. Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat. You're going to save her? Yes, Anna, I said, my voice cold and hollow. I am going to save her. I will perform the therapy. We will find a suitable, legal donor through the state registry. She will live. A look of pure, weeping relief washed over Anna's face, but I wasn't finished. But you and Brandon will never see her again, I said, each word a final heavy spade of dirt on their graves. The state will strip you of your parental rights, due to your felony convictions and your history of fatal child neglect. When Lucy is recovered, she will be adopted by a loving, stable family who will care for her. She will grow up knowing she was saved by a charity, and she will never, ever know that her biological parents were the monsters who killed her brother. Anna let out a long, pierced shriek of pure, agonizing despair as the officer pushed her into the back seat of the police cruiser. The doors slammed shut, and the cars drove away, their sirens fading into the distance, leaving only the quiet, clean morning air behind. The trial of Anna and Brandon proceeded with swift, brutal efficiency. The evidence of their past crimes was irrefutable. The forged bank signatures, the paper trail of the fake deaths, and the tragic medical reports of Lawrence. Final days left no room for defense. The state prosecutor made an example of them, charging them to the fullest extent of the law. Anna was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security state prison for grand larceny, insurance fraud, and criminal child neglect resulting in death. Brandon received 25 years, with no possibility of early parole, due to his role in facilitating the fraud and his complicity in the abandonment of his nephew. While they were being led away to begin their sentences, Lucy was quietly moved to the pediatric ICU under my direct supervision. The sensory desensitization therapy was a slow, delicate process. Every day, I sat by her bedside. I adjusted the lighting in her room, replacing the harsh fluorescent bulbs with soft, warm amber glow. I introduced specific acoustic filters to block out the sharp, high-pitched beeps of the medical monitors, replacing them with the low, steady hum of a white noise machine that mimicked the sounds of a mother's heartbeat. At first, Lucy would scream and claw at her skin whenever a nurse approached. But slowly, over 3 weeks of meticulous, patient therapy, her nervous system began to calm. She learned to tolerate the touch of the blood pressure cuff, She learned to sit quietly while the dialysis machine hummed beside her, filtering the toxins from her blood. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, a matching kidney was located through the state organ donor registry. The surgery lasted 5 hours. I didn't perform the transplant myself. I was a pediatric neurologist and psychiatrist, not a surgeon, but I stood in the operating room, monitoring Lucy's neurological signals, ensuring her brain remained calm and free of the sensory overload that could trigger a fatal cardiac spasm. When the surgeon finally stitched the final incision, he looked up at me and nodded. "The kidney is functioning, Dr. Smith. She's going to make a full recovery." I walked out of the operating theater and sat on the bench in the quiet, dim hallway. I leaned my head against the cool wall, closing my eyes. For the first time in 10 years, the heavy, suffocating pressure in my chest didn't feel like an iron band. It felt like a soft, fading sigh. 6 months later, the autumn leaves had turned a deep, vibrant gold, falling slowly in the quiet municipal cemetery on the outskirts of the city. I walked down the familiar gravel path, carrying a small, worn stuffed toy in one hand and a single, fresh white lily in the other one. I stopped in front of the small, clean marble tombstone. "Lorne Smith, beloved son, held in our hearts until we meet again." I knelt down, brushing away a few fallen leaves from the base of the stone. I placed the white lily gently on the cold marble, and then carefully set the stuffed toy beside it. The same toy he had clutched in his final moments, waiting for a mother who would never return one. "It's over, Lorne," I whispered, my hand resting gently on the top of the stone. "The empty plate at your grandparents' table has been cleared. Your mother and Brandon are in a place where they can never hurt anyone again. And your sister is safe." A gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, rustling the golden leaves of the oak trees and carrying the clean, cool scent of the autumn earth. For the first time in 10 years, the silence of the cemetery didn't feel like a heavy, accusatory weight. It felt like a quiet, peaceful rest. "Andrew." I turned my head. My deputy, Eve, stood a few yards away, holding a folder. Beside her was a middle-aged couple, their faces warm, gentle, and filled with a quiet, anxious hope. Behind them, holding the hand of the adoptive mother, was Lucy. She looked healthy, her cheeks rosy, her eyes bright and curious as she looked at the fallen leaves. She was no longer shivering, no longer terrified of the world. The adoptive parents, a wonderful, patient couple who had spent months undergoing training at our clinic, stepped forward. "Dr. Smith," the adoptive father said, his voice thick with emotion, "we are ready to take her home. We just wanted to bring her here to say goodbye to you first." I stood up, smoothing down my coat, and walked over to them. I knelt down on the gravel, looking at Lucy. She looked at me, her dark eyes studying my face for a long moment. Then she reached out her small, warm hand and patted my cheek, exactly the way Lorne used to do when he wanted to tell me he was happy. "Be a good girl, Lucy," I whispered, my voice thick as I gently patted her head. "Go with your parents. Live a beautiful life." The adoptive mother wiped a tear from her eye and took Lucy's hand. As they walked slowly toward the cemetery gates, Lucy turned her head, waving her small hand toward me through the golden, falling leaves. I waved back, watching them disappear into the warm, afternoon light. I turned back to Lorne's grave, looking at the fresh white lily resting against the stone. The circle was closed, the debt was paid, and the light was finally returning to the world. "Goodbye, my boy," I whispered. I turned and walked out of the cemetery gates, stepping forward into the quiet, peaceful autumn afternoon, ready to save the next child.